People think power comes from rules, but real power comes from the person who understands those rules better than anyone else. If you've ever felt bullied, controlled, or pushed by someone who thought they could scare you, then keep listening, because this story will give you the courage to stand up for yourself. My story begins with a simple letter, a plain white envelope, no name, no warmth, no kindness, just a cold message from the HOA, a message designed to scare us, a message telling us that my wife would be fined for something she did not even do. And at that moment, I realized something powerful. When people cannot control you honestly, they try to control you unfairly. This is not just a story about an HOA. This is a story about respect, courage, and standing against injustice, even when the whole world expects you to stay quiet. My wife is a soft-spoken woman, gentle, calm, smart, the type of person who never raises her voice even when she is right. And that's exactly why the HOA thought they could scare her. They saw kindness as weakness. They saw patience as silence. They forgot that even a quiet person becomes brave when fairness is attacked. And here's the twist they never saw coming. My wife wasn't just a homeowner, she was the auditor of the HOA itself. She was the one who checked their accounts, their spending, their reports, their records. She knew every number, every policy, every mistake they made. And the people trying to fine her were the same people she was auditing. But they didn't know we would not stay silent. When people in power forget their limits, the truth becomes the strongest weapon you can use. The HOA mailed us a notice saying she violated a rule she never broke, a rule that didn't even apply to her. The letter was written like a threat, bold words, sharp tone, almost like they were shouting through paper. And I still remember how my wife reacted. She didn't cry, she didn't panic, she didn't get angry. She simply took a deep breath, held that letter in her hands, and said, "They expect me to be scared. I think it's time they learn who they're dealing with." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were fire. For people over 60 who have lived long enough to understand life, you know this feeling. A moment where silence breaks, where patience becomes strength, where truth becomes your shield, and where you stop being pushed around. Sometimes the smallest person in the room carries the biggest truth. When she opened her audit files, everything became clear. Their spending wasn't clean, their reports had mistakes, their fees had errors, their accounts had adjustments. Everything sounded legal, but everything felt wrong. My wife didn't speak much. She didn't need to. She let the numbers speak. She highlighted every questionable detail, every unexplained expense, every missing document, every violation they made themselves. The same people who fined her were breaking more rules than any homeowner ever did. And here's the beauty of truth. It does not shout. It does not threaten. It simply stands tall. When you have nothing to hide, you walk with peace. But when someone hides the truth, even silence becomes heavy. We sat together that night, sipping tea, reviewing every single document. She looked tired, but not defeated. She looked angry, but controlled. She looked ready. I held her hand and said, "You don't have to fight this alone." She smiled the way a strong woman smiles, gently but unshakably, and said, "I'm not fighting for me. I'm fighting so they don't do this to anyone else." That moment changed everything for me, because when a person fights for others, their courage grows 10 times stronger. The next morning, she wrote her response letter. Not emotional, not aggressive, not rude, just calm, direct, and legally perfect. Every sentence had truth. Every line had proof. Every word had confidence. And at the end of the letter, she added one line that still gives me goosebumps. As the HOA auditor, I have reviewed the accounts. I believe the board may want to review their own compliance before issuing fines to residents. That one sentence was enough to shake them. Some battles are not won by shouting, they are won by knowing the truth better than the person who tries to lie. When they received her letter, everything changed. They tried pretending. They tried ignoring. They tried delaying. But truth has its way of forcing itself into the light. The HOA called an emergency meeting, not because they cared, but because they were scared. Scared of exposure, scared of accountability, scared of the woman they thought they could silence. And guess who was sitting at the head of that meeting? My wife. Calm, quiet, but powerful. She laid all the documents on the table. Every report, every violation, every irregularity. The entire room went silent. They could find homeowners, but they could not find the truth. They could not hide from the auditor. They could not run from the numbers she had. Because numbers do not lie, even when people do. It only takes one honest person to shake an entire system built on fear.
People in power panic the fastest when the truth finally walks into the room. If you've ever seen someone try to cover their tracks, keep reading, because this part will remind you how quickly lies fall apart. The HOA board sat in that meeting room like school children who knew they were caught. Their eyes moved everywhere except toward my wife. Some pretended to read papers. Some pretended to think. Some pretended they didn't understand the documents in front of them. But everyone knew the truth was standing right there, calm, confident, and undeniable. My wife didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of truth was heavy enough. She began with a simple sentence. Before we discuss any fines, we should discuss the financial inconsistencies I discovered. The room froze. People shifted in their chairs. One man cleared his throat. Another tapped his pen nervously, and the board president tightened his jaw like he had swallowed something sharp. When truth enters quietly, guilt becomes loud. My wife listed everything slowly. Every missing receipt, every unexplained payment, every fee that didn't match the record, every report that looked adjusted at the last minute. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply read the facts. And the facts were louder than accusations. One board member finally spoke. His voice cracked as he said, "These are small errors, nothing serious." My wife looked straight at him. Not aggressive, not rude, just firm, and said, "Small errors don't repeat themselves for 3 years." Silence returned, this time even heavier. People above the age of 60 know this moment well. A moment where excuses stop working. A moment where truth sits like a mirror in front of someone. A moment where every lie feels heavier than the last. You can't escape truth when the person holding it has nothing to fear. The HOA president tried changing the subject. He said, "Let's stay on track. We're here to discuss the violation notice." My wife smiled gently. A smile that told him, "You can run, but only in a circle." She opened the HOA rulebook, the same rulebook they used to threaten her. She flipped the pages calmly, and then she read the rule they claimed she broke, word by word, line by line, exactly as it was written. And when she finished, she said, "According to your own policy, this rule does not apply to my property." Everyone knew it. Everyone heard it. Everyone saw the board president's face turn pale, because this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was targeted, planned, intentional. They tried using their rules as weapons, but they forgot she was the one who knew those rules better than them. When someone tries to scare you with power, remind them that knowledge is stronger than fear. The board members started whispering among themselves, a quiet panic, a silent scramble. They didn't think the meeting would turn this way. They didn't think she would come prepared. They didn't think she would fight back. But my wife wasn't fighting for pride. She wasn't fighting for ego. She was fighting for fairness, not just for herself, but for every homeowner who could be targeted next. She said something that made the entire room go still. Her voice was calm. Her words were sharp. If you issue fines without proper procedure, it becomes harassment, not enforcement. That one line broke their confidence. They weren't dealing with a frightened homeowner. They were dealing with their auditor, their accountability, their mirror. Power becomes weak the moment it meets someone who isn't afraid to question it. The president tried another tactic. He said, "This is unnecessary. We can settle this quietly." Quietly, the favorite word of anyone who wants to hide something. My wife placed the rulebook gently on the table and said, "Silence helps you, not the homeowners." She was right. Silence protects the wrong people. Truth protects everyone. She continued reviewing the accounts, her voice steady, controlled, professional. And the more she read, the more uncomfortable they grew, because every number she quoted, every date she mentioned, every document she highlighted was proof that the board wasn't following its own rules. They wanted to find her, but now they were the ones under the microscope. When you push the wrong person, you might end up exposing yourself. One board member finally broke down and admitted, "Maybe we should review everything again, just to be safe." Safe. Another favorite word of people who feel the walls closing in. My wife nodded and said, "Yes, review it. Because if the homeowners find out what's happening here, they will demand answers, not excuses." Her dignity, her calmness, her clarity, it was stronger than anger, stronger than fear, stronger than the entire board sitting against her. You see, real strength doesn't shout. Real strength doesn't threaten. Real strength doesn't intimidate. Real strength stands with truth even when 10 people sit against you.
The board ended the meeting that day with forced smiles and nervous eyes. They tried to walk out with dignity, but their footsteps told a different story. Their confidence had cracks now. Their voices lacked firmness. They were shaken, and they knew it. My wife walked out of the room quietly, but with a calm strength that made every person step aside for her. Not because she demanded space, but because truth creates space for itself. That night, the board did not rest. They began working behind closed doors, trying to find a way to turn the situation around. Not by being honest, but by being strategic. They couldn't accept that the person they tried to bully was the one who knew every weak point in their system. And instead of correcting their mistakes, they looked for a new way to trap her. A quieter way, a smarter way, a way that looked legal but felt wrong. They drafted a new letter, a longer one, with more formal words, with a tone that pretended to be polite, but underneath it carried the same threat as before. They claimed violation needed further investigation. They claimed they wanted to review additional documents. They claimed they wanted full cooperation. Every line of that letter was just another attempt to regain control. They wanted to intimidate her again, but this time with more professional language. When my wife read it, she didn't look surprised. She only said, "This is their second move. People who fear the truth always have a second move." She sat down at the table with her files, her notebook, her laptop, and the original HOA rulebook. This time, she wasn't just responding to a fine. She was preparing for a pattern of unfairness, a pattern of dishonesty, a pattern of people who will bend the rules as long as no one questions them. She reviewed everything again, slowly, carefully, patiently.
She rechecked the violations they listed. She rechecked the dates. She rechecked the policies. She rechecked their responsibilities. And once again, she found that the board was wrong. Not just wrong, not just mistaken, but careless. Their so-called investigation was nothing more than a delay tactic, a way to push her into silence, a way to bury the real issue under paperwork. The next HOA meeting was scheduled 2 weeks later. And during those 2 weeks, something interesting happened. Board members began avoiding her. Emails slowed down, phone calls stopped, conversations disappeared. They acted like she was invisible. But silence is also a message, and she read it clearly. They weren't ignoring her because she was unimportant. They were ignoring her because they were scared. On the day of the meeting, she walked in with a binder of documents. The board walked in with forced smiles again. They tried to sound calm. They tried to look strong. But their eyes moved too quickly. Their voices trembled too slightly. Their paper shook too visibly. Everyone above 60 knows this kind of behavior. It's the behavior of someone holding secrets behind their back. The president began by reading from a prepared speech. He called it a clarification process. He called it an administrative review. He called it a routine discussion. But nothing about it was routine, and my wife could hear every dishonest intention between his lines. When he finished, he looked at her and asked, "Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" She opened her binder, not with rush or anger, but with calm confidence. She placed her papers on the table, neatly, one by one. She looked at every member of the board and said, "Before you review me, I want to review your actions over the last 3 years." The room went still. It felt like her words pulled the air out of the room. People stopped moving. The president swallowed his breath. Everyone shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She began listing the mistakes she found. Not accusations, not insults, just facts. Clean, clear, organized facts. Dates that didn't match, documents that weren't signed, expenses that weren't explained, reports that weren't accurate. Her voice stayed steady, but the board's confidence crumbled with every sentence. She wasn't attacking them, she wasn't insulting them, she wasn't shouting. She was simply exposing what they chose to hide. And for the first time, they had no reply. An older woman on the board, one of the quieter members, finally spoke. Her voice sounded tired. She said softly, "These issues, we didn't know they were this serious." My wife nodded gently, but she also knew this wasn't the full truth. They may not have known everything, but they knew enough. They had seen things, they had ignored things, they had allowed things. And now, the truth was forcing them to face what they avoided for years. The board president looked irritated, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. People who lose control often try to regain it with pride. He leaned forward and said, "This seems like an exaggeration. These reports are old. They're irrelevant now." My wife didn't react with anger. She only replied, "Irrelevant to you, very relevant to the homeowners you represent." Her calmness was more powerful than any insult. Her clarity was sharper than any argument. Her honesty was stronger than their resistance. By the end of the meeting, the board was divided. Some members wanted to reevaluate everything. Some wanted to hide everything. Some wanted to avoid everything. And the president wanted to control everything. But truth does not follow orders. When my wife left the room that day, she could feel the shift. The board no longer feared the violation. They feared exposure. They feared accountability. They feared the one person who couldn't be manipulated. And now she knew she wasn't going anywhere. She came home tired that night, but not defeated. She poured herself a cup of tea and said quietly, "They will try something bigger now, something desperate." And she was right, because people who are cornered always make their boldest move next.
The board did not sleep peacefully after the last meeting. They had underestimated my wife, and now they were paying the price for it. Not with money, but with fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing control. fear of the truth they had tried to hide for years. When people lose the comfort of hiding behind lies, they start looking for bigger lies to protect themselves. And that is exactly what the HOA did next. 2 weeks after the meeting, we received another letter. Not a simple envelope this time. A large, thick, official-looking packet. Multiple pages, legal-style formatting, bold headings, highlighted sections. They wanted this letter to look intimidating. They wanted it to feel heavy. They wanted it to leave a mark before it was even opened. My wife held the packet for a moment. She didn't panic. She didn't sigh. She simply shook her head slowly and said, "This is their desperate move." When she opened it, everything became clear. The board had taken the original false violation and turned it into something much bigger. They now accused her of multiple violations, violations that did not exist, violations that were not even listed in the rule book, violations created from thin air. They were trying to drown her in paperwork, confuse her, exhaust her, break her spirit, silence her with fear. This packet included charts, diagrams, highlighted notes, all written in a way that sounded professional, but said nothing truthful. People above 60 understand this tactic very well. When someone wants to confuse you, they make things sound complicated. They use big words. They use long documents. They use legal language. But complexity is often just another disguise for dishonesty. My wife read every page slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't react. She simply absorbed every detail carefully, quietly, and intelligently. After an hour, she closed the packet and said, "They're not trying to prove I broke rules. They're trying to bury their own mistakes under noise." And she was right. The packet wasn't about law. It wasn't about order. It was about fear. Fear of what she discovered. Fear of what she could reveal. Fear of losing control of the board. The next HOA meeting was scheduled to discuss the new findings. The board wanted to put her on the defensive. They wanted the homeowners to believe she was the one breaking rules. They wanted to flip the narrative, turn the auditor into the accused. But they forgot something important. She didn't just know their rules, she understood their weaknesses. On the day of the meeting, the room was fuller than usual. Some homeowners had heard murmurs about the conflict. Some were curious. Some had their own complaints about the board. Some were simply tired of the same people misusing power. My wife walked in with her binder again, but this time she carried a second folder, a thicker one, filled with documents she had been gathering for weeks. When the meeting started, the board president tried to sound confident. He read a long speech filled with complicated phrases. He used words like compliance, violation procedure, policy breach, and community standards. He was trying to confuse the room, trying to bury the truth under vocabulary. But the homeowners were older, wiser, and much smarter than he expected. People above 60 don't fall for complicated words. They want clarity. They want honesty. They want respect. When he finished speaking, the room stayed quiet. Not because people agreed, but because they were waiting to hear what my wife would say. The president finally looked at her and said, "You may respond." My wife stood up slowly, not dramatically, not aggressively, just firmly. She placed the new folder on the table and said, "I expected this packet. When people cannot defend their mistakes, they create distractions." The room shifted. The board members looked uncomfortable. Homeowners leaned forward. Everyone felt the tension. She opened the packet they sent us. She pointed out every false claim, every made-up violation,
every sentence that didn't match the rule book, every note that contradicted their earlier documents. She explained each point like a teacher explaining a lesson, calm, clear, slow, simple. The homeowners understood every word, because truth, when spoken clearly, always makes sense. Then she opened her second folder. This folder wasn't about her, it was about them. She presented the financial irregularities again, but this time with more detail. She showed the timelines, she showed the receipts, she showed the mismatched numbers, she showed the unapproved expenses, she showed the missing documentation. Everything was explained in a way even a child could understand. Homeowners started whispering among themselves. Not the confused whispers from before, but whispers of realization. Whispers of, so this is what's been happening. Whispers of, we deserve answers. Whispers of, why didn't they tell us this? The board began to panic. Their president tried interrupting. He tried changing the subject again. He tried calling her explanation irrelevant. But homeowners didn't accept it this time. They spoke up. They asked questions. They demanded clarity. For the first time in years, the board was the one being held accountable. And my wife, she stood there with grace, with strength, with calmness, like someone who had carried the truth for too long and was finally letting it breathe. By the end of the meeting, it was clear to everyone what had happened. The violations weren't real. The packet was a distraction. The board's desperation was showing, and the homeowners were no longer blind. When we walked out of the meeting, my wife looked relieved, but she also knew something important. A desperate board doesn't give up easily. They would try one final move, their biggest one yet.
The board was out of options now. Their silence didn't save them. Their paperwork didn't scare her. Their distractions didn't work. Their lies didn't hold. And their confidence collapsed the moment homeowners began asking real questions. When people who rely on power lose control, they make their biggest mistake in their final move. A mistake driven not by strategy, but by panic. And the HOA board was drowning in panic now. 3 days after the heated meeting, another letter arrived. Not from the HOA this time, but from their lawyer. This was it, their final move, their last attempt to break her, their last hope to protect themselves. The letter was written with cold precision. It claimed my wife was interfering with board operations. It claimed she was misusing her position as auditor. It claimed she was creating unnecessary conflict. And it warned that legal action could be taken against her if she continued her disruptive behavior. It was a threat, a legal-shaped threat, a final attempt to scare her into silence. When she read it, she didn't shake, she didn't cry, she didn't even look surprised. She simply said, "I knew this was coming. Desperate people always choose intimidation last." Then she did something the board never expected. She reached into her cabinet and brought out a folder so thick it looked like it contained an entire book. Inside that folder were emails, reports, error logs, missing approvals, budget discrepancies, audit notes, and every irregularity she had collected over months. All neatly organized, all fact-checked, all dated. She wasn't preparing to defend herself. She was preparing to expose them. She contacted the homeowners directly, not with anger, not with drama, not with emotional arguments, but with truth, carefully explained, clearly written, and backed by documents. She told them exactly what happened. She showed them the packets. She showed them the false violations. She showed them the missing finances. She showed them how the board tried to silence her. And the homeowners, many of them older, experienced, and wise, understood instantly what was happening. They had seen this kind of power abuse before, not in HOAs, but in life, in workplaces, in families, in systems run by people who loved authority more than honesty. Within days, homeowners began talking. Whispers turned into conversations, conversations turned into concerns, concerns turned into action. A petition started making its way through the neighborhood, a petition demanding a full external audit and a vote to remove the board president. People signed it quickly, quietly, confidently. They didn't need long speeches. They didn't need threats. They didn't need fear. All they needed was the truth. And my wife gave them that. When the petition reached enough signatures, the HOA had no choice. They were forced to call an emergency meeting, a real one this time, not the fake ones they used to control. The board president sat at the table, sweating through his collar, trying to convince everyone he did nothing wrong. But the room wasn't listening to him anymore. They were listening to the truth they finally saw. One by one, homeowners spoke against the board, not with anger, but with disappointment. They felt betrayed. They felt misled. They felt used. It didn't take long. The vote happened quickly. The decision was clear. The board president was removed. 2 other members resigned. The remaining members agreed to let an outside auditor review the finances, and they asked my wife to help guide the transition because she had proven she was the only one they could trust. Not because she wanted power, not because she wanted revenge, but because she carried truth with grace when others carried lies with pride. After the meeting, as we walked home, the neighborhood felt different. People waved at her. Some thanked her. Some said, "We're glad you stood up." Some said, "You saved this place." But she didn't smile with pride. She smiled with relief. Relief that the truth had finally won. Relief that she didn't bow to fear. Relief that she protected not only herself, but everyone who lived there. That night, she placed all the documents back into the cabinet, closed it gently, and said softly, "Power doesn't scare me. Dishonesty does, and I won't ever stay silent in front of it." Her battle was over. Her dignity remained intact. Her courage changed everything. This wasn't a story about an HOA. This was a story about strength. Quiet strength, patient strength, truthful strength, the kind of strength people above 60 know very well. The kind of strength that changes unfair systems. The kind of strength that makes the world better for others. And my wife, she carried that strength with grace.
Another moment arrives quietly, almost gently, and repairs everything that was broken. This final part of the story begins with that quiet moment. It was early in the morning, and the sun was rising with a soft golden glow. My wife stood by the kitchen window, holding her cup of tea, and for the first time in a long while, she looked peaceful. After months of dealing with the HOA's harshness, false fines, loud accusations, and unfair treatment, that peaceful expression felt like a small miracle. Her shoulders were relaxed, her breathing soft, and the anger that once lived in her eyes was finally gone. But little did we know that this day would bring the biggest turning point of all. Because on that very morning, an email arrived from the regional HOA office. It was not just a regular email, it was a reply to the audit report my wife had quietly prepared, reviewed, double-checked, and submitted with complete honesty. She had not written it with anger. She had not written it for revenge. She wrote it because integrity runs deep in her heart. She wrote it because fairness matters to her more than power. She wrote it because she simply could not allow lies to stand where truth deserved to be. And now, the truth was finally ready to speak. When she opened the email, her eyes widened, her hand froze on the mouse. I watched her from across the room as her expression slowly shifted. First surprise, then shock, then something I hadn't seen for months, relief. She let out a long breath she seemed to have been holding for ages. Then she turned toward me, and I will never forget her voice when she said, "It's over. They finally know everything." Those words carried weight, history, pain, and victory all together, and in that moment I felt like the whole world had finally become light again. The email was clear.
Her audit had revealed everything: the financial mismanagement, the hidden fees, the unauthorized fines, the personal targeting of homeowners, and the abuse of authority. Not only did the regional office confirm that her report was accurate, but they also praised her for being thorough, honest, and responsible. They even mentioned that several board members would be removed permanently. It felt unreal. After months of being treated like a criminal, my wife was finally recognized as the only person who had acted with integrity from the beginning. We sat together at the kitchen table as she read the email aloud. Every sentence felt like a piece of her pain being lifted. I held her hand and could feel how much she had carried inside her for so long. Sometimes silence hides storms, and my wife had faced a storm that no one else could see. But she never broke. She never let anger shape her actions. She stayed strong with dignity. And that dignity was now shining brighter than ever. Later that afternoon, another message arrived, this time from the HOA president, or rather, the former HOA president. His tone was completely different from the angry, aggressive messages he used to send. There was no shouting, no threats, no fines. His message was short, quiet, and almost fearful. He apologized. He recognized everything she had exposed. He even admitted that the fines they tried to force on her were unjust. He even asked if she would be willing to attend a special meeting as a consultant to help rebuild the HOA structure. For a long moment, my wife simply stared at the screen. Then she smiled gently, not out of pride, but out of peace, and said, "It's over. I didn't fight them to win. I fought them because right is right." That sentence stayed in my heart like a warm flame. Sometimes the strongest battles are won not with anger, but with calm truth. Sometimes justice shines not through shouting, but through patience. And sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who choose integrity over ego. In the end, the HOA that once tried to find her now relied on her wisdom. The same people who once doubted her now trusted her. And the same community that once felt divided was now slowly healing. Not because of fear, not because of punishment, but because one woman chose honesty when others chose hostility. One woman chose truth when others chose power. One woman chose courage when others chose intimidation. And that made all the difference. And the sun set that night, I realized something important. Life gives us challenges not to break us, but to reveal who we truly are. And my wife had shown the world exactly who she was: strong, patient, kind, and brave. Her journey reminded me that goodness is not weakness, fairness is not foolishness, and calmness is not surrender. Sometimes, calmness is the greatest strength of all. This story does not end with victory over others. It ends with victory within ourselves. A victory of truth over lies. A victory of fairness over unfairness. A victory of integrity over fear. And a victory of peace over chaos. My wife did not just win against the HOA. She won a deeper battle. The battle to remain true to her values even when the world tried to push her away from them. And now, as we continue living in this community, every day feels lighter. Every sunrise feels warmer. Every neighbor feels closer. Because peace built on truth is the strongest peace of all. My wife taught me that. And I hope this story teaches you the same. If you believe that fairness always matters, if you believe that truth should always win, and if you believe that no one should be bullied by power, then please stay with this channel, share this story, and help others find courage in their own battles. Because sometimes one story can save someone else's life. And maybe this was that story.